For more than 30 years, Turkey has been trying to join the European Union, and that's still the case, despite all the arguments about refugees, Islamophobia and human rights. But in the coming days, there will be a series of meetings which could give a huge indication of what that relationship will be like in the future. I'm Andrew Hopkins, and I'm talking to the head of the EU delegation to Turkey, Berger, one-on-one. Mr. Ambassador, could you describe to me the current state of relations between the EU and Turkey?
I mean, in a nutshell, the European Union and Turkey have a strong relationship because Turkey for the European Union is not only a candidate country for membership in the European Union, but is also a very important strategic partner. I mean, just look at the location of Turkey. There are many issues that Turkey has to deal with, we have to deal with. But on top of that, we have had over the years a very strong engagement because of the enlargement process on reform efforts, on economic reform efforts, on political reform efforts. There is a very strong economic engagement between the European Union and Turkey. Turkey, or rather the European Union, is the most important trading partner for Turkey. You have also a very high percentage of foreign direct investment coming from the European Union here to Turkey. So it is an important relationship. There are obviously also tensions and problems, particularly last year. We have seen a number of those. So there were some issues that we have to discuss and that we have to resolve. But I think this always happens also between partners. So the important thing is to take these things forward.
I was going to mention, actually, you're saying that there is a strong relationship between the two sides, but as you mentioned, 2017, there were a lot of arguments, disputes between the two sides. Do you think that was they are taken more seriously by the media than they actually are, or there are real problems here between the two sides?
Well, let me describe it the following way. When I arrived here in 2016, at the end of 2016, there were a lot of statements made on both sides that were critical of each other. But at the very same time, there were projects going on, work going on at the operational level in all walks of life. It showed the very strong relationship between the European Union and Turkey on these issues, be it in support of businesses, of civil society organizations, of human rights organizations, whatever, in any, as I said, in any walk of life, and wherever you go in Turkey, you will find projects that we are supporting. Also last year, 2017, and particularly also this year, we have been working together very closely on the migration issue. This is yet again, it shows how important this relationship is between the European Union and Turkey. And this continues and will continue. We have just a couple of days ago, the European Commission decided to continue the support program that we're running here in Turkey. It's called the Facility for Refugees in Turkey. So another 3 billion euros will be made available in order to support the activities that we have here together with Turkey in response to the refugee crisis.
So where are we up to as regards Turkey's application to join the European Union? Because it's been going on more than 30 years now. It's been taking a very long time. How would you describe that particular situation?
The Council of the European Union, actually the General Affairs Council, took a decision in December 2016 saying that Turkey is a candidate country. The negotiations, or rather the accession process, is neither terminated nor suspended, but for the time being there are no negotiations going on until the current situation in the country will change. And they referred to, in that statement, particularly to rule of law and fundamental freedoms. I think that is an issue that has been one of the issues that we have been discussing with Turkey last year. This has also been one of the issues that have led to tension between the two sides. So this is an issue that needs to be discussed further and addressed.
So what are you looking for from Turkey in terms of this issue of rule of law, if this situation is going to change as regards their application to join the European Union?
Well, it is. By the way, it's not only rule of law. There are many other issues as well that are crucial to the relationship or to taking forward this engagement. One is, for example, good neighborly relationship. This is, by the way, nothing specific to Turkey. This is we have with all enlargement countries or accession countries. This is a key element of our discussion. The point here is as Mrs. Mogherini has said on a number of occasions, that Turkey is aware of the criteria and the conditions for taking this forward and will have to act accordingly.
Do you personally want to see Turkey become a member of the EU, and why?
If this is a personal question, I mean, my answer is that I see Turkey as a very important part of the European continent. Not only as a very important part of the continent, but also as a very important bridge to Middle East, to Central Asia, to the Caucasus. So Turkey, this again, my very personal view, would be certainly an enrichment to the European Union. But of course, there's a political process that has to be fulfilled and that has to go on and reach to a certain solution.
So we've got some meetings coming up, and this meeting between the Turkish president and the top EU officials in Varna in a few days. What can come out of those meetings? What's the way forward, do you think, now?
We started a series of engagements with Turkey last May, when President Erdogan was in Brussels in the margins of a NATO summit. He met with President Juncker and President Tusk, and then we agreed that we would have a series of meetings on very specific issues. For example, we had a high-level dialogue on transportation, we had a high-level dialogue on the economy, we had a high-level dialogue on counterterrorism. We have had a series of dialogues on foreign policy issues. How do we cooperate and engage in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in Africa? We are exchanging views. I think the message there was, and the conclusion in May last year was, it is important that we talk to each other than rather about each other in the media. And I think that we have done. And Varna is, or the meeting that is coming up, is the end point of that series of meetings. So we will have to review and take stock at that meeting what we have discussed, what we have reached, or how successful we have been in rebuilding trust and confidence between both sides.
Can you see anything coming out of the Varna meeting, like a sort of resumption of negotiations or anything like that?
I really can't tell at this moment what the outcome will be. I mean, we are still preparing for this meeting. I think one important outcome, as I can see it at the moment, is that the European Union will confirm this continuation of the support program for the refugees. As I mentioned, the formal decision was taken only a few days ago, and I think that's an important message, because this cooperation, in our view, has been extremely successful. When we started this in spring 2016, there were people dying in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean in particular. There were lots of people trying to come to the European Union. This has changed now. From the beginning of this year, from the 1st of January until today, not a single person has died in the Mediterranean. And I think this is partly, and this is a very important, I think, achievement. This is partly because of this engagement that we have, the support that we are providing. And Turkey is honoring these commitments, so there are less people crossing or can cross now to the islands. We have people being brought back from the islands, so the illegal migrants are being returned to Turkey. But we have also a resettlement program going on. That means that Syrians who reside here in Turkey can be taken to the European Union. That program is also running.
For you personally, what do you think is the biggest thing holding up closer relations between Turkey and the EU, or even Turkey's membership of the EU?
I think we need to continue this engagement, have a better understanding of each other. There are a lot of, in my view, ever since I've come here, I've realized there are a lot of misunderstandings on both sides about the other side. I think that we have to work on and to reduce. And of course, in the end, you also need to convince the populations on both sides. I know in Turkey you have a very strong percentage that sees a future in the European Union, and I think by showing the advantage of this close cooperation between the European Union and Turkey. Here in Turkey, the support that we are giving to businesses, to civil society organizations, etc., but also the value of Turkey from a European perspective, as Turkey being a country that is facing a difficult situation in the Middle East, but also being sort of a buffer between the Middle East and the Union. All the efforts that are going into the migration issue will also show in Europe that it's a value of having Turkey.
I just wanted to go back to 2005, which is when the negotiations officially started between Turkey and the EU. Since then, I think more than a dozen chapters have been opened in all these policy areas that Turkey has to satisfy to join the EU, but only one of them has been closed so far. Why is this taking so long? Turkey has made some movements towards the EU, but it seems to be a very slow process.
Negotiations or accession processes are slow processes because you have to go through a tremendous amount of legislation that the partner country will have to transform into local legislation. So this takes a lot of time until this is done. But coming back to what I said early on, there was a decision taken by the member states of the European Union not to open new chapters. This decision was taken in already more than a year ago, so that's the situation at the moment.
But I would say, for instance, in 2010 there was a referendum in Turkey to bring quite a few bits of legislation into line with EU law on about men and women's equality, child protection, this kind of thing. But since, for instance, 2010 to 2016, there's been hardly any movement, there's been hardly any new chapters opened. Really not much progress at all. I mean, how can you explain that?
Opening chapters doesn't mean that, or not opening chapters doesn't mean that Turkey cannot, use European legislation and transform this into Turkish legislation or carry on with the reform process. Opening chapters means that you discuss about the substance, and then you agree on a transition period, how long it will take that you fully transform that legislation into domestic legislation. That's what it means, really. And also, closing chapter means that you have done it, and now the Commission can tick and say the respective country that is joining or wants to join the European Union is now applying we call it the acquis, the status of the state of legislation. So I think when you listen to business people, when you listen to many people in the Turkish society, you will hear that this accession process has actually helped to move the country forward. I mean, Turkey itself is a very dynamic society, a very dynamic economy, and I'm sure will do a lot of things on their own. But I think this accession process that started in 2005 has accelerated a number of these reform efforts.
Do you have any sympathy with the Turkish politicians and some of the Turkish people as well? I think that in Europe, parts of Western Europe, some politicians have Islamophobic views that issue is coming into play as far as Turkey's relations with Europe are concerned, and also its bid for membership.
Look, Islamophobia or xenophobia in general, or the fear of the other, has been around for a long time. Whenever there is an enlargement process going on, there is always somebody will raise this point. I think the important thing is that politicians also show that we can overcome this. We do a lot of things as European Union to make sure that Islamophobia or xenophobia is addressed in the right manner. One very strong program that we have, an antidote, as I would call it, is the Erasmus program, where you have an exchange of students. So Turkish students are coming to the European Union, European Union students or European students are coming to Turkey to learn from each other, to learn from each other's cultures, to see each other's cultures. I think this is the strongest antidote that we have at the moment to reduce this. Of course it is a concern, particularly when xenophobia or Islamophobia turns into criminal acts. Sometimes you have attacks on religious groups, on religious institutions, on religious sites, as you sometimes see. I think this has to be addressed within the rule of law, within the law that we have to address these criminal acts.
I think some people would say maybe a student program would be quite helpful, but at the moment it's the politicians who are in charge, some of them, who are making some of these statements. And we talked about 2017 before, when there was the constitutional referendum in Turkey, and there were a lot of elections in Europe as well, which seemed to all coincide, and there was a lot of rhetoric from from both sides about that. Do you think there's a sort of, for some European politicians maybe, there's Turkey is a sort of easy punching bag, if you like, a way to get easy nationalist support, that these elections were coming up and it was a good way of barring politicians for coming to campaign in the constitutional referendum, an easy way of scoring cheap points as well in the Brexit referendum. One of the more famous lines from the Leave campaign was, Turkey's going to be a member in a couple of years and 70 million Turks are coming to Britain very soon. How do you feel about all that? Is this acceptable?
Look, these are, as you say, this is in the context of elections, and particularly populist movements are trying to make use of that. But it didn't work. You have had, you have had a number of European countries. You had elections where the populists did not win the elections, particularly in 2017. I mean, the French election is maybe the best example here. Even in the UK, I think there's a good relationship, a strong relationship between Turkey and the United Kingdom. So I don't really. Yes, it is there. We need to know what it is. We need to address it. But I do not think it will ultimately damage the relationship between the European Union and Turkey, because we in Europe, we ourselves, we have an interest in addressing these issues.
I wanted to ask you about the customs union next, which was sort of put in place in 1995. In recent years, Turkey has been pushing for this to be updated, sort of renegotiated, but there doesn't seem to have been much progress so far. Why is that the case?
The customs union, yes, indeed, it came into force, I think, in '96. It has been now more than 20 years. It is, I think, an important tool of the relationship between Turkey and the European Union on economic issues, but it is not complete. Agricultural products, for example, public procurement services are not included in the customs union. So there is both sides have come to the agreement that we need to update after 20 years or more than 20 years. We need to update this customs union. The European Commission on the 21st of December 2016 put a proposal on the table of the Council suggesting a mandate for negotiations. So that's where we are at the moment. This is being discussed in the various working groups of the European Council, and then this mandate has to be given to the Commission in order for the Commission to start the negotiations with Turkey. There were also political issues involved in this, so maybe that's why it has also. I mean, that's the reason why it has slowed down. But there is clearly the intention on the side of the institutions of the European Union, once this mandate is given, to negotiate as quickly as possible.
I was wondering, because the customs union, maybe renegotiating or updating that would be a way of moving relations closer without necessarily bringing all the political considerations into play and sort of holding things up, because this is something that can be beneficial to both sides. With Turkey, the European Union is its biggest export market, and also there's a huge amount of goods coming from the EU into Turkey as well. So anything that's going to expand that agreement is surely a good thing. And could this be political considerations be put aside while this is moved forward?
I think the institutions have said it is beneficial for both sides. It's a win-win, economically a win-win. But of course there are political considerations, because ultimately, if you want this customs union to come into force, you need the agreement of the member states to that. So there are efforts going on at the moment between Turkey and various member states to improve relations. I think that's important. Only when these relations are again back on track, you will also have progress on customs union, I would think. Although, as I say, the Commission has provided already a draft mandate for the negotiations.
I wanted to ask you as well about one of your predecessors, Marty Raney, who gave an interview last year in which he said the problems really of Turkey-EU relations at the moment are so difficult that really either the membership talks should be declared sort of dead in the water, or they should just be put on ice, if you like, to wait until there's a better time, there are better conditions between the two sides. Do you agree with what he says?
I can only tell you what I said before. There's a formal decision by the member states of the Union to say that Turkey is a candidate country for membership to the European Union, that process is neither terminated nor suspended, but there are no active negotiations for the time being. I think that's the position that we are in at the moment.
As regards the visa-free travel at the moment, which Turkey would like to see happen, it says it's satisfied all the conditions now for this to happen. Can you give me any more information about where that's at? Has the EU looked at it? Have all the conditions been satisfied now?
The EU is looking at it. So the Turkish government has presented a document that was handed over by the Turkish ambassador in Brussels to the first Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Timmermans. It's a rather complex situation because there are a lot of legal aspects to be looked at. So our colleagues in Brussels are now going through that proposal from Turkey, and then will of course respond in due course.
How concerned are you at what has been happening in the Mediterranean at the moment around Cyprus, the gas exploration that's going on there, and how much could this disrupt relations between the EU and Turkey?
I come back to what I said early on. It's important to have good neighborly relations, particularly with member states of the European Union. There can always be disputes or differences of views or issues. But the important thing is to resolve these issues in a peaceful manner. There are peaceful settlement, peaceful conflict settlement instruments. I mean, there are many things that can be used. I think that's what the point here is, that we want to see a good relationship between Turkey and the member states of the European Union, including the immediate neighbors.
Can I put a theory to you as well, which I think some people in Turkey think about the whole process, the relations with the European Union, how that's sort of continuing, that when you hear from Turkish politicians about the relationship, they say, we still want membership, we're keen to get on with that as soon as possible, we should keep going with the talks. But when you hear from EU politicians, you don't really hear quite the same sort of enthusiasm. There's always talk about, well, you know, rule of law, human rights, we need to sort out various other issues before these kinds of things can happen. It seems as if really the EU doesn't really know what it wants with Turkey. It would like to keep it in its sort of sphere of influence, if you like. It would like to sort of contain it in a way, but it doesn't really want to sort of have it as one of its closest friends. But it can't seem to make up its mind about what the relationship should be. Is there, do you think that is the case?
I think the Union wants a strong and a stable democratic Turkey that can continue and will continue on the accession process once the time comes again for restarting the negotiations. You have heard the Commission President, Mr. Juncker, who has said on several occasions that he's afraid that Turkey is moving away from the European Union. But he also said that the European Union stands ready to support Turkey for it to come back to this path. I think the decision was taken that the accession process or the candidate status was offered to Turkey, so that is still obviously the official position. And I think we have to see and we have to work with Turkey in order to resume this and to bring it back to this path.
Can you understand the frustration of Turkish politicians, Turkish people about this process, though, about how it appears to them, how it's sort of unfolding and why it's taken such a long time?
I hear this obviously all the time when I speak to not only to politicians, also young people. When you speak to students, you get this question all the time. Obviously, yes, it has been taking a long time, but these processes take a long time. Countries don't join overnight. This is a long process of harmonization, of aligning the legislation with what is called in technical terms the acquis in the European Union. So this always takes a long time, but it also very much takes into account the wish of the country or the speed the country wants to move forward in these accession processes.
What do you think is the way forward now? Is it really to try and carry on with the negotiations in a calm atmosphere? But having said that, what would you say to maybe politicians or on both sides maybe who have used more inflammatory language over the past year? Is that something that really has a part in this process for Turkey and the European Union?
Well, Turkey and the European Union are partners, as I said, on many issues. I think in that we have to underline that this is what keeps this relationship going. So we have seen already this year, already at the end of last year, that the language that you call inflammatory is going down. We have, I think, a dialogue. We've had a series of dialogues since May last year, and this has to continue. So, in a nutshell, we have to continue talking to each other rather than about each other all the time via third parties. So I think this process needs to continue and needs to lead to rebuild trust and confidence. Obviously, European politicians will keep saying we need to see something on the core values the European Union stands for, on rule of law and on fundamental rights, freedom of expression, etc. These are issues that are mentioned also as topics to be discussed in a couple of weeks from now. And of course, on the Turkish side, you will hear other demands that are being made to the European Union, which I think we all know. So we have to continue this dialogue. I think that's the main message here.
Ambassador Berger, thank you very much for talking to TRT World.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.